Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here to present a practical case. My distinguished predecessor talked about food for thought. I'm now going to talk about food. And I'm going to give you a practical example of how production planning and integrated business planning could be applied in a food producer and what it can do with the company, simply put. A little bit of background. I've worked in this industry for 25 years. I have had the privilege to not only market the solutions, but also to sell them and design them and even implement them. So I think that's really rewarding, working with people that undergo that big change. So a little bit about Blue Ridge before I start. When you look around in the supply chain environment, you will find Blue Ridge typically in the wholesale or distribution environment, but also in retail and also in production. Our customers are small, all the way down to, I think the smallest one is the 300 SKUs, and the biggest ones are millions of SKUs. Lately, we just acquired a new customer. If you think about MediaMarkt, it's a similar customer in the Nordics. It's called Elkjøp, and it's got 300 stores and 10,000 employees. So that gives you a picture of the width of what we do. Oh, okay. So my mic. Is it on? Oh yeah, it is on. Thank you. All right, so that was a little bit about Blue Ridge. So let's then talk about the practical case. This is a company. I was actually asked to give a practical example of a food producer doing integrated business planning and production planning. And I asked my customer, a company called Grilstad, would you like to present here? And they said, you present. We are a little bit shy, so I'm going to present their case to you. The company is one of Norway's leading manufacturers of different food products made of meat. They were founded in 1957. They have their headquarters in Trondheim, and they have 200 million euros in turnover. Just as an example of how different Norway is from here. At their headquarters now, I think the temperature is like 5 degrees centigrade, and we have 30 here. So that's a little bit of the environment they operate in. Their products are all kinds of meat products. And I'm mentioning this because this is then the big challenge for a food producer. It's that all these products, they are a big challenge because they have all the requirements on date stamps, different standards that they have to comply to. And of course the worst disaster for Grilstad is if they have to withdraw any product from the market because it's over the date or it's toxic or whatever. So that's really, it's really a complicated game, and there's a lot on stake. And yeah, the product mix is a third or to a fourth of frozen burgers, salami, cured sausages, and cured meats. So that's really their mix. And I'm also mentioning their brands. They have some brands. It's divided in 3 main brands. And why am I mentioning this? It's because when they do their planning and their forecasting, the forecasting and demand plans, they go in very many dimensions. So it's not only the products and locations themselves, but it's also by attribute, and it's also by customer channel, and which is a necessity. And I'll give a practical example of it, why it's necessary to have that granularity of the planning. So this is the priority of the brands, where the Tind at the top it's the exclusive one, and the Grilstad is the common one at the bottom. So their customers are actually the food retailers in Norway. And would you believe it, but the small nation of Norway have 5,500 food stores. It's incredible, but we have it. And then there is another sector, and that's the food service, which is all the hotels and restaurants and caterings and cruise ships and whatever they deliver to. And the customers are actually very demanding. They have had a tradition of not really looking at the complexity of their suppliers' production and sourcing, so they just expect them to have the products when they order them. And to make it a little bit more complex, when they do promotions, they even have a tendency of not sharing the promotions in advance because of competitive measures and so on. So that means that very often Grilstad, this producer, they have to guess or anticipate that there might be a promotion coming. And maybe they get a 2-week warning, but their production cycle is 3 months. So then just starting to produce it when they get the input from the customer, that's too late. It won't work. So they need to figure out another way to do it on. And of course, their products have seasonal spikes. When we get close to Christmas, Norwegians tend to eat certain products, the traditional products that spike very heavily at Christmas time, and the same happens at Easter time and so on. So that's really the customer segments. They have then, based on their different types of products, they have the 3 different plants. And they then source their meat from the Norwegian farmers, whether that's sheep going around in the mountains or cattle that they breed, it doesn't matter, that's their source. And then of course they have a lot of other ingredients coming from all over the world. And these guys are also exposed to the unstable supply chains that we experience today. So many of these spices and stuff that they source into their production, they are also in danger of not being supplied. So they need also to plan for that. And finally then, about the products, they have several thousands of products that they produce. And each of the products, they have a recipe. And the recipe is actually then the bill of materials, if you want. And all of that needs to be taken into account when they produce their meat and their products. So that's really the company. And where did they start? They started out with saying that the customers, they don't really understand what we're doing, but they are getting more and more demanding. And they don't even disclose the necessary information we need for our planning, so we need to do something. And of course there are emerging trends. Things tend to happen in the market, and we need to be able, some way or another, to turn around faster. And I thought I'd give you an example. One of the things that happened was that COVID broke out, and I don't know how it was here locally in the Netherlands, but in Norway all the restaurants were closed overnight. So the 12th of March 2000, all the restaurants closed. And of course, if you have an Excel-based planning system, it's very hard to take that into account and turn around and do something with it. Since these guys actually break their forecasts down to channel level and their demand plans equally, they have the planning foundation to turn around and actually change their plans in the blink of an eye, literally. So that meant that when they got the information about the restaurants closing down, they could adjust to that. And also, of course, there comes a time where the restaurants reopen. Well, then that could also be planned well in advance. And remember that I mentioned these recipes. Well, let's say that we are going to change the recipe, and we're going to change it from a certain date. Then, of course, there is also this timeline of planning that you need to be able to put into your plan, that my recipe actually changes from a certain point in time. And of course, when they did their Excel-based production planning, they sat in each of their silos doing their own stuff, and there was no connection between them. So it meant that from a sustainability perspective, they had a large problem. They had several occurrences where they produced for scrap. So that means that they had to throw away stuff that they missed out because they didn't understand the proper demand plan, and they couldn't either connect the dots in their supply chain. So this multi-echelon planning was totally absent, unfortunately. And of course, when they had their production lines, there was a big challenge. These products are A, B, C, D products for different channels. What do we then put in production first, second, and third, and so on? So this sequencing was a big problem. And of course, there was no connection between the demand and sales department, the category department, and the production department. So that meant that the guys doing the key account management with the big food chains and so on, they could decide on things, and not knowing whether they had the capacity to actually deliver. So a food chain could actually say, we're going to have 20 tons of this product on promotion from a certain date, and they said, yes, we can do that. But if they had consulted the production department, they would have been told that, no, we can't do that. We don't have the capacity. So that was a real problem. And of course, this all led to them actually getting into trouble. The customers became dissatisfied. There was a lot on stake. They produced for scrap. They had a lot of firefighting. They needed to do something. So then they said, we have grown out of our jacket. We need to fix this problem. We need to have a unified planning across all the supply chain steps or production steps that we have, and we need to connect it with the demand forecasting and the demand planning. So what we have done is to implement a production planning solution that does all the multi-echelon inventory optimization throughout the supply chain, taking capacity constraints into account, also taking the date restrictions, the optimal production cycles, and so on into account. All the service level goals, then driving all of this in all steps of the production, and then tie it to the demand planning, the demand forecasting, and actually eventually then the integrated business planning as a whole. Just as an example, this is just a simplification of their production environment, where we start out with the finished goods. Then that's the products that we forecast, but remember, we forecast it on channel and sub-channel level, so they can control it all the way to the bottom. Then of course, make the production plan for the finished goods, cutting from the bigger cut, for instance, sausages, and we manage then all the production planning throughout the supply chain back to the suppliers, where we typically buy meat, salt, spices, and so on. And the new thing for these guys is that all of this is tied together. So when something happens at the end product, it permeates all the way through the supply chain back to the buying of the ingredients. And then, of course, the final step was to connect all of this to the integrated business planning, so that we had a unified process and also then a unified forecast or a consensus forecast driving all of this throughout the organization. And this is then just a typical planning cycle that such a company can undergo, where we start with the transactions from their ERP that drives then the supply chain planning solution in Blue Ridge, and we then produce the baseline forecasts that go into the integrated business planning, where all the key account managers, the category managers, and so on use that for their planning. And eventually you can see that we come to a point where we have the consensus planning, where we can also then confer with the financial department whether this open to buy is what we have of cash to support this operations going forward, and also the supply plan part of the operation, where we can say that this plan going forward is actually within the boundaries of the company. So this is then an end-to-end planning process, you could say. And we have to remember that all this company had from the start on was actually just their ERP solution and spreadsheets. That's all they had. And they were very good at their spreadsheets, very sophisticated and everything, but they ran into problems. First of all, the capacity of the spreadsheets came to their limits. So that's one problem they had, and they became also very people dependent. That meant that the guy that created this brilliant formula or connection in the spreadsheet, when he or she quit, then the competence went out the door. And that's something they really wanted to avoid. And if there is anything I really have a passion for, it's actually all the planners and all the buyers around in the companies that are not looked at as the real key people in the organization. They are just a necessary evil. And what we've seen in this particular company is that that profession has come to its right by far. These people are now resources for the rest of the organization. They sit on a lot of information, and they are then becoming the drivers for change, if you want. So what did we then achieve? First of all, we have one integrated solution. So that was really the purpose when we started out. We are able to see the consequences of all our decisions in advance, so we don't run into those troublesome situations anymore. And all players are on board. They use the same methodology. They think the same way. The dots are connected, and they talk about one truth and not their truth in each of the department. More important, on a strategic level, this company actually put their business at stake, you could say. Because if they didn't fix their problem, they would be in trouble. Because their customers, the retail customers with all those stores, if they didn't get the products in the right shape and time from Grilstad, then they would suffer. And they couldn't afford it. So Grilstad needed to get their act together. And so that was really a big achievement for them. Being able to see what happens going forward, not the next order, not the next production order, but a production plan that actually goes a full year forward, puts Grilstad in a position where they can see the problems a long time before they occur, and even better, the system actually helps them plan around the problem before it even becomes a problem. So that's really a very big change. So instead of running around and putting out fires, they now can sit down in peace and quiet and plan together without this uneasy feeling that we have a problem. Well, they will have problems in the future also, but the problems are manageable. And of course, one of the things that really hurt Grilstad is that when those spikes, those seasonal spikes occur, they had capacity problems. Now they can see the bottlenecks before they occur, and they are on top of the problem. So this really changes the company. So the owners, they get a more profitable company, and the management get better control. And not to forget, the planners and the buyers, they enjoy their work life. This is really rewarding for us as a supplier to see. That's the Grilstad case for you. Thank you very much.